Okay, so welcome everybody to this month's briefing on automated feedback on writing. I'm Simon Buckingham-Shum and I'm at the Connected Intelligence Center. I'll let Shibani introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Shibani. I'm a lecturer at the Faculty of Transdisciplinary Innovation, TD School. And I do research, and I was also previously a PhD student at the Connected Intelligence Center working on AcaWriter.
Great, okay. All right, you're seeing my slide okay, are you?
Yeah.
Yep. Good. All right, okay, so we're doing this once a month, except when we forget, like last month. Sorry, folks, about the calendar schedule cock-up. But we're here, and we plan to keep doing this into next year. Here's the plan. We're going to give you a 1 hour sort of intro, which will be a bit more in depth than the 10-minute intro that some of you may have seen yesterday in the Learning and Teaching Forum. We'll give you a very quick intro to AcaWriter. And then we're going to really spend some time showing what it looks like when this gets embedded into different subjects, okay? Along the way, we'll be explaining how we work with academics and the different aspects of AcaWriter so that you feel a little bit more familiar with it. We'll talk about law essays, business reports from accounting, learning to write a research abstract, reflective writing, which is used in many subjects for critical reflection on, for example, workplace internships, professional practice, and so forth. Then we'll allow you to get your hands dirty with the web tool itself, just so you can experiment. And if you want to find a little bit of sample writing that you'd like to try out in AcaWriter, then feel free to dig that out. It might be a great example or a poor example or a bit of both, just so you can see what the difference is that AcaWriter makes sense of. Okay. And then there's some time for us to share and discuss and reflect on any questions you've got and whether this interests you in integrating AcaWriter into your own teaching practice. Okay. And we don't necessarily expect you to be signing up at the end of the day or anything. This is just to get you oriented, and we look forward to hearing back from you if you want to then take the conversation further. Okay. All right. Any questions or surprises in that overview? Does that cover the kinds of things you were hoping to get from today? Yep, okay. Now I can't see my chat when I'm in full screen, but hopefully Shibani will pick up any questions. So if you just, there's a small number of us, so just put your little digital hand up or put a question into the chat and we'll pick it up on the way. If that's helpful. Okay. All right. First of all, AcaWriter is now, part of the UTS learning ecosystem officially since May, when we announced it to students, that represents, the end of a multi-year R&D project based here in KIC, working closely with a number of different academics and different faculties. So if you want to learn more about the project, then it's on this link. All these slides will be available afterwards along with this replay, so don't worry if you're not catching them. And this was an applied R&D project with quite a lot of peer-reviewed research coming out of it, investigating and documenting the ways in which academics and students respond to this kind of artificial intelligence. That's essentially what we're talking about, a form of AI which is making sense of your writing. And that's a novel thing. We're used to spelling, grammar, and plagiarism checking. We're not used to seeing anything much smarter than that in education. Although, of course, all of us are used to talking to our little assistants on our phones and talking to chatbots when we go onto a tech support site or even the UTS website if you're a student now. But we're not really used to AI making much deeper sense of text than spelling, grammar, and plagiarism. So this is a new venture, but it's one that's going to, I think, fill a niche in the rich array of different kinds of feedback that students get. Okay, so this is not about, we're done with humans, we'll just let the machine grade all the essays and blog posts. This is about trying to enrich the feedback that students are getting in ways that no human could conceivably provide, because none of you are going to put your hand up to provide instant feedback 24/7 on draft after draft after draft, right? I mean, that's just not what people can do. And this is a niche for machines if it's designed well and if it's coherent and fits into the whole student experience, of course. Okay. Well, why are we doing this? Backing out for a moment. Well, of course, writing is hard work. Academic writing is hard work, and students need better feedback on this. This is the only way that they really learn what we mean by good academic writing. And of course, it's across all disciplines. There are clearly some variations between disciplines, but people need to learn how to make their thinking visible in their writing. And there are approved ways of doing this, which are very different from just informal chat and so forth. Okay. So we've created a website that gives formative feedback, emphasis there. We're not doing summative grading here. This is formative feedback on drafts on a very specific aspect of writing, which sort of is a hallmark of academic writing. And that's what we call rhetorical moves, which we'll explain. And we support two broad categories of writing. One we call analytical. That's your classic academic writing in the third person, showing that you've mastered some ideas, talking about literature, reporting an experiment, doing a lit review, writing a research or abstract or a summary, doing a business report, being analytical, and making arguments and pointing to evidence and so forth, okay? Then reflective writing is learning journals, reflective essays, perhaps doing a project review, talking about yourself, using first-person language typically. I found it very difficult to do this. I was surprised when I learned that I feel like I didn't deal with that situation very well. Next time, I hope I will do better. I feel that I'm becoming more X and less Y. Okay, it's a very different kind of writing. And again, many academics struggle to articulate what they mean by good reflective writing. And it's hard for students to understand as well if they haven't done it well. You can do reflective writing completely privately, of course, and that's how many people do it, just to clarify their own thinking, like writing a diary. But we also ask people to sort of do performative reflective writing, which they need to submit for assessment. It's a kind of performance, just like any kind of writing. It's not Dear Diary and no one else is ever going to see it. Again, you have to make your thinking visible. You have to show that you are being reflective. Well, what does that mean? How do I do that with language? So we're very interested in this reflective writing as well. Okay, now, rhetorical moves. So we're not going to get too complicated on you here, but when you study written language, Swales talks about it as a discoursal or rhetorical unit that performs a coherent communicative function in written or spoken discourse. Okay, now to put that into plain English, it's basically making clearer to the reader what your stance is with respect to something you're about to say. Okay, so here are some examples, okay? If we just look down the right-hand side here, you will see statements that will look very familiar, okay? You all know how to read these. Little research exists on something, okay? It's actually performing a particular function, and we tag it with a particular tag here called a question. Recent studies indicate ... okay? Well, we're talking about what do we know? What is the evidence or the consensus? It might not be that everybody agrees, of course, and that's obviously very interesting when we're doing academic study. We want to talk about contrasts, disagreements, and tensions. This approach fails to address ... okay? And there are many ways of expressing contrast. Okay. Stormwater pollution is a significant issue that arises. Okay, so we're highlighting an emphasis for the reader here. We're drawing attention to something. This is an important topic. You should care about this. Okay. Academics and researchers are obviously very interested in new ideas or improving on something. So people will often say, you know, provides a new approach, is an advance on, overcomes previous limitations. Okay. Expressing surprise. Well, we're always very interested in surprises when we're talking about ideas. So something was unexpected. Talking about trends, growths, patterns, tendencies. Okay, I mean, this is an example from a business essay. Its popularity is growing, right? But we might be talking about a trend in the literature or a trend in some other aspect. Okay, and then finally, this sort of signposting summary sentences where you tell the reader explicitly what you're going to do. We show how. This essay will argue. To conclude, this paper has demonstrated. So you're just referring to the document itself and reminding the reader what you have told them or about to tell them. Okay, so these are signaling to the reader that there's a problem, or there's novelty, or there's surprise. Okay, you'll see lots of examples of this. Okay, but hopefully you agree that these are the kinds of things that happen in pretty much every discipline, whether it's experimental science or history or social science or, you know, name your faculty. Okay, and we'll be showing you examples. Okay, now you'll see a live demo of this later, but here's the analytical report, a report on analytical writing, which is where the system has got its electronic highlighter out and is tagging sentences with a little icon that represents the kind of sentence that it thinks it is. Okay, so this is the opposite of spelling and grammar checking where you underline the bad stuff. Here we're going to highlight the good stuff. Okay, that means that if all the text comes back completely unmarked, that's a bit of a pause for thought, because it's basically saying, I couldn't see anything here that I recognize as a classic kind of move. All right, so with the increasing popularity of ... that is a trend statement. The 2012 review does not address, is a contrast statement because we've got a problem of some sort. In fact, I think that summary signal sentence there is actually an error, and AcaWriter is imperfect, and we will discuss that as well, because I think it thinks that it's talking about the document, as though the author is saying that in their review, this document does not address something. Okay, this omission questions, another contrast move. This essay we'll discuss is a summary signaling sentence. Okay, and we'll show you what appears on the feedback and example tabs later on. And just to show you, when we talk about reflective writing, we get very different rhetorical moves where people are talking about these kinds of things: thoughts, feelings, self-critique. We really want people to engage in self-critique. And we group those together into broad categories called context, challenge, and change. And then drawing on the literature on good reflective writing, you can start at a superficial level and you can get deeper. And in the research paper here, if you want to learn more about it, this leads to a number of questions you can ask yourself as a writer as you sort of move through this space. Now, again, that's a very complicated framework. We don't introduce that to the students in AcaWriter. What we do is we boil it down to 3 icons: context, challenge, and change. And then we use typography to highlight other things. Okay. Self-critique, epistemic statements about belief, learning, or knowledge. I personally think that, you know, these challenging sentences are really important. What did you find challenging or surprising? Because you're typically trying to reflect on that. Okay, So we'll come back to some of these examples. Just to wrap up, what we are going to show you in more detail next is essentially a process where you have the educators, that's you guys, you know all about assessment, you know all about designing good student tasks, in this case, writing tasks. And what we've been focusing on is how do we bring that into dialogue with the kinds of things that people like Shabani and I talk about, which is the machine's view of writing, which is looking for particular features in the text. And then we want to generate feedback to the user. And when all these cogs turn in a synchronized way, we have a coherent student experience where the kinds of things they're being assessed on through some activity matches the kinds of things that are being picked up by the tool and fed back to the user. Yeah. So that's the kind of process that we go through with you when you want to think about how this relates to a particular writing activity in a particular subject. Okay, I'm going to stop there and hand over to Shabani now. But any quick questions from that intro? You will be seeing more of AcaWriter as we go through. Any hands up? I'm not seeing hands up. I will stop sharing so I can actually see you all. Okay, I'll let Shabani jump on then.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So what I'm going to do right now is introduce how we integrate AcaWriter into these different learning contexts. So like Simon said, we want to bring these analytics and the UI and the design of these technologies to the pedagogical context and make sure that they're well aligned. So I'll talk through some examples of how this is being done. So the first one context that I'm talking about is law essay writing. So this is a context where for law students, this is a key disciplinary skill. They have to write a lot of essays where there is an emphasis on outlining legal arguments, making sure they make those connections, bring out their stance or perspective on them. And the instructors are looking for key structures in their writing, in the rubrics that they design. So for instance, they're looking for things like engagement with law and scholarly literature. So they want to connect with previous cases, literature from law in their essays. And what we try to do is actually map these kind of elements to what AcaWriter can find out in its rhetorical move. So for here, the engagement with law and scholarly literature could be mapped to AcaWriter's background move. And similarly, they were looking for things like a statement of thesis, which is, like Simon mentioned, where there's a clear indication of what the writing is about. Say this article will talk about, or this essay will discuss, and also a summary plan saying the essay will have 1, 2, 3 parts, and these are the different parts that we're talking about. And these could be mapped to AcaWriter's summary move. So that's how the mapping or integration is done. And again, they were looking for identification of issues, things like, however, there's a problem, and again, critical analysis and some key bringing into forefront some issues and so on. And these could be mapped to AcaWriter's contrast and emphasis moves. So that's how the mapping was done. So you can clearly see that there is an alignment between what the instructor was looking for in their students' essays. So good law essays, for example, have to have these elements. And we were able to map these with what AcaWriter can find out in its rhetorical moves. And based on this alignment, we actually tuned AcaWriter's feedback to make sure it's relevant to these law essays. So the highlights indicate the rhetorical moves that AcaWriter found in the law essays. And then there is additional feedback which is given to students when they're missing some of those moves. So for instance, the student is missing a background move, which is talking about prior work or literature in that area. AcaWriter will tell them, it looks like you're missing a background move, and give suggestions on how they can improve it. So they can include linguistic cues to make it clearer, and there are some examples given for that. And again, if there's missing emphasis on something in their essay, then AcaWriter will give them the feedback message saying it's missing. So these feedback messages are tuned for that specific context of law essay writing, and it will be different if they're not looking for an emphasis in their essay. So we can eliminate that message. And all of these feedback messages were co-designed with the instructor to make sure it's relevant to their students' assessment. And the third tab gives more examples. Again, shows them this alignment between those rhetorical moves and what the instructor was looking for in their essay. Give them examples of sentences so they can relate back to the examples that they write in class. So that's how the feedback is tuned in AcaWriter for a particular context. Here in this case, it's an undergraduate law essay. And again, another...
Shivani, do you want to just go back a moment and just draw attention to the message in green at the top of the feedback message?
Yes, that is correct. So there's a green box right here, which actually says that the rhetorical moves highlighted by AcaWriter are used in academic writing, but they have to use it with caution. So like Simon mentioned previously, the machine comes with imperfections, so they may not always agree with the feedback that the students that the tool is giving. So there's an agency for students to push back and saying if they think the tool has got it wrong, that's fine. It's just another way for them to think about these structures. And if it's wrong, it's fine to push back. So the tool is only giving them what it thinks it found in the writing. So that cautionary message comes with every bit of feedback that AcaWriter gives. So students don't take it as the absolute ground truth, but actually lets them think critically about the feedback that they're getting from the machine. Yeah, thanks for bringing that to attention, Simon.
Thanks.
And again, there are activities or writing tasks that are designed for students to induct them into AcaWriter. So these are helpful because it provides an orientation to students to use the tool and connects it back to their subject or whichever assignment they're working on. So in this case, here in the law context, it was mainly an online activity with some in-class activities. For instance, the first one was an introductory reading or video where the educator explains what these rhetorical moves are in their context. So for many students, and generally for people, this rhetorical move itself is a new concept. They would not have heard that before or noticed it in their writing. So it's good to have that induction about what it is and again, related back to their context so they know that it's specifically talking about law essays and why it's important for lawyers to know about this. And I'll just go through some of the screenshots from the online activity that students did. Again, these are all activities that are co-designed with the instructor to make sure that students understand what these rhetorical moves are in their own writing context that they're dealing with. And it's been implemented using some online platforms. So the first task here is again a matching exercise where students will map those rhetorical moves with the rubric elements, again, to understand the clear alignment between them. And here it's a drag and drop, which will turn green if they do it right, red if it's wrong. So it's kind of like a game that they can play along with that writing. And then there are sample revisions which are given to them where an originally low quality essay can be improved with these structural markers. So this is again done by the instructor to show how these markers can help improve the structure of the writing. And so students can learn from these examples. And then there is an assessment activity where students are asked to put on the hats of the marker, think about what grade they would give if they were to assess that essay. So it helps them to think about what key concepts or structural indicators they're looking for in an essay. And then there's a revision activity where, again, the goal is to help them practice revision and drafting, and because we do know that multiple stages of drafting and revision helps improve their essay. So we want them to engage with that piece of writing many times and using automated feedback using that. So they get to use AcaWriter, get the feedback, make changes to different sentences in the essay to improve it, with the goal of improving the quality of the essay. And then they self-assess their improvements. There's also a peer discussion activity, which is for students to discuss with their peers about the automated feedback they got, but also about the changes in the writing, what kind of changes they made, how the feedback came from the tool, how they applied it, and so on. So, and then finally, there's a feedback survey that students complete. This is for us to evaluate how useful they thought the whole activity and the automated feedback was. And in the end, they also had a quick start guide. So they can go ahead and use it on their own essays after they get motivated to use them based on the samples that we gave students. So this is a quick snapshot of the entire activity in law. So as you can see, it has a number of different tasks. And all of these may or may not be relevant for your context, but this is just an example to say how it was structured in a particular context. And you might say choose and pick a few tasks that might be relevant for your particular writing context, and come up with tasks for that. And another quick example is from accounting. It's a business report where students have to still look for things like an organization's information, how they define performance, justification of that performance, and how they communicate it to their audience. Here again, even though the context is entirely different to what an argumentative law essay would look like, here also AcaWriter's rhetorical moves, we were able to map them to these things that the instructor was looking for in an accounting report. So you can see the perspective, emphasis, contrast, and so on. We were able to map. So this is how feedback will look like in an accounting context. Here, the messages are again different because these messages are co-designed with the accounting instructor, and they want to look for the key rhetorical moves they're looking for in a report. And if one of them is missing or more are missing, they define these messages to say, it looks like you're missing a background move, and here are some cues to improve that. So all of these are co-designed with the instructor. And here the writing activity is also quite different. It was spread over a number of weeks with both in-class and online activities, very similar to the law activity I explained, but it was done as a homework activity, an optional one. And then there were in-class activities called peer discussion, self-evaluation, and so on for students to do it. And here students were able to apply AcaWriter feedback on the report they submit as part of their assessment. So we can actually see the improvements that they make due to the feedback that they got. So again, the key message here is that it might look very different for different contexts, and it's best work with the educator along with to make sure that the tool fits best in their whatever context they're using it. So I'm going to stop here and pass it back to Simon.
Thanks, Shivani. Good grief, look, we're already halfway through. Who's got any questions from what Shivani was showing there? Okay, you saw two different subjects. You saw the bits that AcaWriter does. You saw how there's a whole learning design sort of pattern that embeds AcaWriter into a student task. It might involve several different steps. We should clarify that AcaWriter only does the analysis of the writing and giving of the feedback. So some of the other screenshots you saw there were from an experimental system that just helped, it presented a form to students and asked them to rate their confidence or what they thought they could improve about the text. So some of those screenshots were from a research, experiment from Shivani's doctoral research. But AcaWriter, the tool that's available to you now, is doing the tough bit, the instant analysis of the writing. Any thoughts or comments? Otherwise, I'll just push on.
I have a question, Simon. Caroline here. So they're really nice learning cycles, you know, like preparing students for using AcaWriter, looking at sample text. Is everybody doing that who's using it, or are some people just taking it as a tool? Because to me, it's like, you know, so we understand rhetorical moves already because of our backgrounds, but a lot of students, as you say, don't understand those. So I'd be interested to know, do you know have you got any sense of students who've used it without that careful scaffolding, and how useful they've found it?
Yeah, well, since we released it only in May, up till May, students only encountered this if it was part of their subject.
Right.
With that sort of careful scaffolding. So at the moment, we don't have a lot of evidence to be able to make strong claims about this. We have anecdotal reports of students finding it useful.
Yeah.
And there's a whole website which introduces them to all of this, which is in one of the links at the end as orientation. So what we wanted to try and do was give the benefits of AcaWriter to as many students as wanted to try it out, with online resources to help them try and get oriented.
Yeah.
But we haven't yet had the chance to do any sort of really detailed analysis of or evaluation of that since we released it. But now that it is out there, you know, as a supported, you know, integrated tool within the UTS environment, now we're really trying to ramp up talking to people like yourselves, so that it does get into more subjects.
Yeah.
And that you build on all the best practice we've managed to develop over the last few years.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other thoughts at the moment?
If we wanted to integrate something like that with a sort of staged activity over several weeks, would we work with your team to build that into our subjects? And how much support would you be able to give us doing that sort of a setup? Or
Is that a Simon? Yeah, it's really interesting, Simon. I can see all the links that we're not really clearly making across all the different teams working on things. So I'm wondering, did Deb Nixon from Law work on that essay one?
Hang on. So one question at a time. So first of all, what we want to be able to do is work with you to evaluate AcaWriter and whether it's suitable for your texts, and try and sit down and figure out what's working and what's not working, and figure out why that might be. And then we can advise you on the design of effective writing activities based on the kinds of templates that we have been showing you. Yeah. Yes, we'll do our absolute best to support you in that.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, and sorry, the second question was?
No, I'm interested because I thought Vanessa said, could the all team work on that? But so have you got funding, Simon? Like, do you have enough resources to work with academics in faculties to develop those cycles?
Well, my hope is that we are now going to start passing this knowledge on to people like yourself in the LX Lab Learning Technologies team.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we have worked with the academic language and literacies team already in developing some of this. Yeah. And they're the obvious people to develop that further, because we have limited capacity in KIC. We'll do our very best to support it, but this is a new innovation, and we're trying to figure out how we do scale up the support we can provide. So absolutely, what we would like is for people such as yourself, Caroline, and others who have worked with us, like Rosalie, and so forth, to help spread this and get it embedded in coherent ways.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay, and I'd be really interested to chat with you afterwards if you've got some further thoughts about that, because I know you're also busy and everything and so forth. But
no, I can see lots of places where it'd be useful.
Oh, I'd love to chat more about that then. Okay. All right.
Simon, I just posted another question as to how many students can the system handle? Because I wanted to incorporate this 2 or 3 years ago into my subject, but When I told them how many students I had, they said it's probably not ready for that yet.
Ah, okay, interesting. So, you know, do you mean 1,300 students using it all at once?
Yeah.
In like you've got them all in a lecture theatre, and you're going to say everybody log into
No, as
AcaWriter
in
now?
the submission date. The submission date would be coming up, and generally,
yeah,
everything right at the last minute, so they'll all be submitting at that time.
yeah. Well, that will be an interesting challenge, but so far so good. And we have the joy of cloud computing means that we can sort of turn up the dial if we know that you've got a submission deadline coming up. We can basically increase the capacity, but it's a somewhat unknown as to exactly how hard, because doing natural language processing is quite computing intensive. It's all hosted on, you know, UTS's Amazon cloud infrastructure, but we can give it more power when we know there's a spike coming up. So we'd be interested to chat to you about that. And when we know that's going to happen, then we can prepare and then do our best to plan for that. Yeah, so don't let that put you off if that's what you'd like to do, for sure. Okay.
And the way we did that previously was using, a lot of them were staggered. So we know that a set of tutorials run on specific days of the week, and then there are, say, 400 students running on another day. So we can actually plan for it based on that exact usage if we know that better.
Yep. We've certainly had like 40 to 60 students in a classroom all doing it at once. You know, so we know we can handle that. 1,300 would be fun. Let's see how we can plan for that. Okay, so I'm going to whiz through a couple more examples and then get your hands dirty. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is writing a good abstract. And whilst not all students are writing research abstracts, although certainly perhaps by third year and into honors they will be, when they're, you know, summarizing an experiment or a dissertation or a project. And a classic way of teaching this is the CARS model, creating a research space. This is very well established. It's actually from Swales, who we quoted earlier about rhetorical moves. And this is widely used in the teaching of writing good abstracts, okay? You established why something is an important topic, and there are various ways of doing that. You then indicate the gap, the problem. What is it that you're going to try and deal with? And then you say, well, and I've got something to say about that. That's a sort of archetypal model for a good abstract. Okay. And so we've mapped that into AcaWriter's sentence types by saying, okay, move one will often be characterized by emphasizing how important some problem or challenge or topic area is, and talking about background information. Move two is usually by talking about contrast or open questions, things we don't yet know how to do. And move three is often about saying, you know, in this paper we do this, or in our experiment we investigated and we found the following. And okay, so we group these different sentence types into higher order moves 1, 2, and 3. And that allowed us to provide an interface of this sort. So when you select research abstract in AcaWriter, you get this kind of feedback, which is highlighting in one of the 3 colors and explaining why. It highlights that. Okay. So just as Shabani showed you activities from undergrad subjects, this is the structure of a workshop that we use with PhD students. Okay. It's following, you know, here's the high level pattern of the class of activities where they basically engage in a number of activities. We run this face-to-face and online. And they go through some exercises, introduced to CARS, they do some pen and paper activities, and then they start using AcaWriter to look at texts. Okay, so that's just to give you another example of a learning design pattern which integrates AcaWriter in a coherent way. Now, some of that has now been put into this beautiful online course on Open, UTS Open, by Sophie Abel, who's coming from an academic language and learning background. She's a PhD student here. And in this course, which is open to the world, you get to do some of those drag and drop exercises that Shabani was showing you earlier. Lots of really nice little interactives. You may have seen some of them in Canvas already on other contexts, where you get to really understand what do we mean by these rhetorical moves, and you get to play around with some example texts. And then of course you eventually go into AcaWriter, where all the language you've learned here is echoed in the interface I just showed you. Okay, and finally, reflective writing. I showed you this framework earlier. So again, we do exactly the same process with you, where you think about your assessment criteria. In this case, we've got a rubric. This is from Cherie Lucas in pharmacy. She's developed a rubric as to what she thinks good reflective writing looks like. And we map the sentence types into that. And just a little glimpse of behind the scenes. Here we have us sitting with Cherie. We've got a Google Doc here. And this Google Doc is saying, okay, if they did, we've got the three context types, sorry, the three sentence types: context, challenge, and change. Remember we had those? What would you say to them if they do have a sentence like that? And what would you say to them if they don't? Okay, so this is where your voice can come through, and you can basically type exactly what you would like the system to say if they do or don't have a sentence like that. And we can get a little bit more advanced as well and say, what happens if they have a triangle but no square? So a triangle is a change statement, but there was no square, which is a context statement, which sort of establishes some interesting incident that happened to me when I was doing my work placement. So they're talking about how they're changing without really establishing the context for it, okay? Or double circles. Purple circles are challenging statements. Sometimes there might be a sentence followed by immediately another sentence. And we can write a rule where they say, wow, well done. It appears that you have expanded the detail on the challenge you faced, okay? So we just go through this process. The academic can write into a Google Doc. You all know how to do that. And once we've finished that template, then that gets codified into the feedback messages that come back to the student. Okay. Okay, that's just a little background so you can see the kind of process you would go through. I suggest, because time's ticking on, that you all jump into AcaWriter now. Shabani's going to just walk you through that. So why don't you just share your screen, Shabani, and just show them what it looks like when you log into AcaWriter so they can see that. Great.
Yeah. So I think I'll just quickly go through in the interest of time, and some of you might have already seen it. So this is how AcaWriter's homepage looks like. So you log in, and there's also an information website which has a lot more detail about the things that we talked about and the examples here. So if you want to click that, there are more introductory videos that you can share with students, and there are resources for educators about the different patterns or learning designs that are used across many different contexts. So here you can go and see how law, accounting, all of those, pharmacy, and all of those different faculties use it in different ways. But again, going back to the main website, we just have to log in with our staff IDs, and it leads to the main page where there's a list of documents. So you can create your own document, which is add document space. And when you create your own genre of assignment for your students, that is, they will use an assignment code later. But for now, you can select one of the types of writing here, say a research abstract or a reflective journal or an analytical essay, whatever type of document you have in hand. And then create this document. And what you need to do is just paste what text you have in the left side of this page. So I'm just going to paste in a sample abstract here. and then click on Get Feedback, and you can see the progress on the top, and AcaWriter returns back those rhetorical moves. It might take a little bit longer for some longer text, but it will give it eventually, or you can try pasting in smaller chunks if you want to get faster results. And again, there are different move details here telling what these moves are. And there's feedback again, which is defined for that particular genre. And then there are resources in the third tab for different findings and so on. And you can try it with many different types of assignments. And as a simple example, if you're working with something like an essay or an abstract or anything scholarly, then you can go with one of these analytical writing types. And if you have, if you even have student examples, which are either really bad or good, you can also try putting that in and see this. If you want to create a sample reflective one, you can do that. And there again, your feedback itself will look quite different, like Simon mentioned. And there are also examples here if you'd like to go and see already worked out examples with AcaWriter's feedback. And yeah, so why don't I stop here and see if there are specific examples for you to try on. Maybe add that in, and you can share what feedback you're getting from AcaWriter, if it makes sense. And there might be even errors coming out of some of the tags it finds out. But yeah, we're happy to chat more on what you're getting.
So yeah, if you want to have a play, then feel free. We can also answer questions while, if you prefer to leave that till later, then we can just, we can have a bit of a chat now, because we've got about 10 minutes left. Are there any thoughts? Here's quite a long piece of text. Yeah, that's an example. It's one of the examples of, you know, a piece of reflective writing from a pharmacy student. I wonder whether it's worth quickly showing them how to create an assignment as well, Shabani.
Yeah, so the assignments tab right here on the top lets you create your own assignment code to share with your students. So you can create your new assignments, say this is a science essay, and add a description, and you can use one of those genres as given. So say a standard analytical one, where there are all of these rhetorical moves for a standard writing are highlighted, like the background, contrast, emphasis, and so on. You can choose that. You can choose even the law essay introduction, law essay feedback, and create this assignment, and it will give you a code here. So you can pass this code on to students, and when they log in, they can create their documents using this assignment code. So in this assignment, create assignments.
Oh no, go to my documents.
Oh, yeah, the wrong page. Yeah, so when they add this document, they can use this assignment code you just created and create their document, and it will lead them to the right feedback.
Right, so that stops students from accidentally trying to assess their science essay with a reflective parser or something like that. And it also means that we can see all those students grouped together in a given assignment.
So can I ask a question there, Simon?
Mm-hmm.
So in reflective writing, for example, I know in health, often they're required to use literature. And I think in the current feedback, so I've just tried the generic reflection, it doesn't really take that into account. So could an academic create one of those codes and build into the feedback that they want students to use literature, and that'll be taken account for in the feedback that's given on AcaWriter?
That's a very good question. We've had quite a debate with different academics who have different approaches to reflective writing. So some of them do want the students to reflect on the literature.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we would have to do new work to integrate both the reflective and the more analytical aspects of that. So at the moment, to get at the reflective bits, yeah, you'd have to do a reflective analysis on it. And then if you wanted to get at the more analytical bits, you would then put it through the analytical parser.
Okay.
And yeah, now it'll be interesting for us to discuss whether we should do a new version which tries to combine both. But you can imagine you might also get a lot of quite confusing feedback coming back because there are very different,
yeah,
you're looking at very different things. There'll be a lot of icons and markers and typography, and it could be rather a mess. So at the moment we've kept them separate. But that's a great example of how different disciplines and academics take different approaches to what they want in their writing. Some academics do not want their students to get into thinking about literature and arguments and debates. They want them to really focus on how they feel they are developing as professionals and how they're connecting their assumptions and biases and history to the challenges they encountered on the shop floor, so to speak. And there'll be other assignments where they talk about the literature and theories and so forth. So one thing you might want to try out in your own time then is, is to choose a few examples of strong and weak writing, and see whether AcaWriter can spot the difference. Okay, because if it can't, then we've got a problem, and we'd have to figure out exactly what's going on here. It could be that there's you're simply looking for things that AcaWriter can't see at the moment. And we'd need a project to improve it. I mean, we don't have the capacity to develop completely new parsers for every academic. What we have found is that in general, these move types do translate reasonably well across disciplines. But, we can exclude certain ones that you're not interested in, for example. And as you saw with the abstract example, it might be that you think that moves of a certain type, you want to group them into a higher order category. Well, with a little bit of coding, we can do that. We don't have a nice admin interface for you to configure those at will. It would need a bit of developer effort to create a new set of categories equivalent to the move 1, 2, 3 that you saw for the abstracts. Okay. Okay, I'm seeing a few comments in the chat there. Vanessa says, I just tried it with a really weak abstract and the feedback about what's missing looks useful. Okay, well, that's good to know. That abstract would probably have come back looking quite white. I mean, there wouldn't have been many highlighted sentences.
One.
One
just one.
Sentence.
It was the weakest student I had, and I just quickly grabbed it because I thought they're the ones I want to push towards it the most, of course. So
yeah.
But it looked the feedback was lovely and clear for them what is missing and suggested beginnings of sentences and things. It's great. Yeah, can't wait to use it.
Great. Okay, well, do let us know how that goes. But even for your advanced students, it might be that they know how to do it, but perhaps they don't realize why they know how to do it.
Yeah,
there is no language to talk about this.
Yeah.
And so the fact that if they have done a good one, they can now understand why it was good. And that's important too. It's a form of metacognition, Okay. Has anybody else got any thoughts? Or feel free to be just trying some stuff out. And if you want to show us what happened, then you can share your screen. We can do a little live inspection. I mean, to be honest, we use this with our PhD students now, and I will put my own abstracts into this to see how it performs. Of course, when you get to a certain level, you know how to break the rules as well, as with anything. But what we're trying to do here is explain what those building blocks are. And when you've mastered them, well, knock yourself out. You can get all creative and do things in a different way. But first of all, let's just get these students on a really solid foundation of knowing what these moves even are. so that there's a language to talk about these things. That's our approach here. We're not trying to get everybody writing in exactly the same way forever. This is an educational tool to hold up to yourself as a mirror to see whether it's picking up on stuff that you missed.
I'll stop sharing my screen now, Simon. I want to.
Okay. I'll just put up a couple of final concluding slides. Hang on. Okay. Oh, let me try that one more time. Here we go. Okay, hopefully you're seeing this. Okay, so just to recap, we'll put these slides, we'll send these slides around to you, and the whole replay for this session will be up. Shabani gave you a quick glimpse of all the different resources that we've got that show you what this looks like in slow motion within the different disciplines. You'll also see examples there of how academics have recorded a video to explain to their students why this is relevant for accounting. So for example, in this video, the academic is saying, well, you may think accounting is all about, numbers. Well, actually, you're going to spend a lot of time communicating to people as a professional, and you need to learn how to do this. Or we had the law academic explaining to her law students that what you do in a courtroom is take exactly the same set of facts and explain to the judge and the jury your stance with respect to those facts, right? And that's exactly what you've got to learn to do in your writing as well, in the briefing to the judge, as well as in your academic writing as a law student. What is your stance? What is your attitude to the facts, so to speak? Do you think that they're established and everyone should believe them? Or are you throwing doubt on them and showing that there's a problem? Or are you explaining that we're seeing a pattern here that is important for us to take note? So she did a beautiful job just explaining to the students why you should care about this as a budding lawyer, as an accountant, as a nurse, as a social worker. Whatever the discipline is, it's very powerful for the students to understand that this isn't just some academic exercise here because we want you to all become PhD students. This is about critical thinking, making your thinking visible, and hopefully building that bridge to the discipline and being able to give good examples of why that's relevant in your subject to become the profession that you've chosen. Just a reminder of the online module. Ideally, I would love to have this up for every different genre of writing, but so far we've only had Sophie doing her PhD around abstract writing, but you can see here just a couple of little glimpses of the drag and drop exercises where students have to start demonstrating that they've understood what we mean by these different rhetorical moves. Okay, well, that's us. This is the conversation starter. We would love to hear more from you when you've had time to digest and think about when you might want to introduce this. We've already talked about some of the preparatory work you could do to see whether this does seem to work for the kinds of writing you care about. Not much time before Christmas now, but drop us a note if you have time to play beforehand. Otherwise, we'll pick this up in January when we've all had a good rest. Okay, I have to run now, straight to another Zoom. I'm going to stop the recording. If any of you have any other final comments, well, maybe Shabani can field them. Otherwise, just get in touch with us by email. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Shabani. That was great.